Hello and welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Mark Etheridge. We are continuing on with our SEC preview series of podcasts. Today, we're going to talk about the LSU Tigers. You might have heard of them. They're coming off a national title. They're second in 3 years. I went on Chris Burke and Mike Rooney's podcast, D1 Daily, the other day. They asked me about an LSU dynasty. I don't know that we're quite there yet, but boy, you compete for a national title this year, and we can certainly start having that type of conversation because they are operating at the very top of the sport.
Yeah.
So excited to jump in and talk about that. First, a reminder, this episode of Highway to Hoover and every episode of Highway to Hoover over the last calendar year or so has been brought to you by Academy Sports and Outdoors. Excited to have those guys on board. Appreciate their partnership throughout the last year here on Highway to Hoover and generally at d1baseball.com. Mark, the train doesn't appear to be slowing down for LSU, and I think it speaks to the level of confidence we have in this coaching staff, in this program, to kind of just continue the pace at which they've been going. That you look at the lineup and there's a decent amount of guys being replaced, some new faces there, and yet really on both sides of the ball, frankly. But yet, I think you're with me that we just kind of give the benefit of the doubt that they are going to be, just as consistent as they've been under Jay Johnson.
Yeah. When we look back to the year they won it with Skeens and Dylan Cruz, and then you look at the next year when they had the dip, and you remember they got off to such a slow start in conference play, a really challenging schedule, and then had to fight and claw just to get into a regional, and then they did well in it. But the difference I see between this year and that year is just the amount of returnees for this year, like a Curiel or Jake Brown or Stanfield. You've got, and even like a Cade Beatty, who wasn't a starter, although he got quite a bit of playing time. Those players return. You Kason Evans and William Schmidt and some of these Maverick Rizzi, right? A lot of these guys, they got to experience it. They know what it looks like, and I think they'll be able to help bridge with the newcomers, both the freshmen, another really talented freshman class, and then all the transfers who are coming in expecting to play. And I feel like that this version of LSU is going to be comparable to to a team that's going to play for it all. I think that the part they've got to figure out is last year Cade Anderson, Anthony Ianson were just so dominant in that 1-2 punch. How the question is, what's the rotation going to look like, and you're trying to replace it, and you got Chase Shores who certainly got some big outs as well. Who steps into those roles? I think that's a key thing. And then you lose a guy like Jared Jones. Where's the power going to come from in this lineup? Those to me are the two biggest questions that LSU needs to answer.
I think that's fair. Yeah, we'll start on the lineup because I'm kind of intrigued by this group in a couple of different ways. One is that I think you can go up and down, especially with the newcomers, and you can nitpick them, right? Where it's like with Zach York and with Braden Simpson, transfers from Grand Canyon and High Point, the question is always going to be, are you going to be able to make the jump, right? And then you look at a Trent Caraway, and it's like, well, he's never really put together a full season at Oregon State. He's had little bits here and there, little stretches where he's been able to carry an offense, but he also has stretches where he kind of is absent, right? And then he was injured a lot as a freshman, and so we can sit here and nitpick it, but at the same time, it does appear on paper that those newcomers kind of address the things that LSU needed to address. There was already a lot of hitability in this lineup. When you look at, I know he's not coming off the best year, but Stephen Milam's an elite bat to ball guy. Chris Stanfield is a bat to ball guy. Derek Curiel is like the ultimate bat to ball guy. And oh, by the way, supposedly he's a little bit stronger this year. So should maybe impact the baseball a little bit more. But when you talk about guys like Caraway and Braden Simpson, and to a certain degree, Zach York, although he's a pretty good pure hitter as well, those are all guys that can hit the ball at the ballpark. And so they're taking a little bit of there's always risk with transfers. So they are taking that little bit of risk that those guys are going to be able to make it translate. But when you talk about the profile of player that they need in those spots, I think those are kind of exactly the right profile of player that
Hmm.
that they were, they needed to be in the mix for. And I'll say one other thing here when we talk about position players is that, on the Mississippi State episode, I talked about the importance of Ben Davis returning to the closer role when he could have been an MLB.
Hmm.
I think you could say similar things about Chris Stanfield in the outfield, where it's a guy who's played center field and he went into this year knowing I'm not going to play center field.
Right.
He could have transferred and probably played center field almost anywhere else he would have gone. Or I'm sure he had his own opportunities in pro ball. He could have gone off into pro ball and just said, let me just get my pro career started. But instead, he's back at LSU and he's willing to play left field, a
Yeah.
less glamorous defensive position, because he still wants to be a part of the program and still has something to prove, and understands that his opportunities in pro ball are still probably in front of him, almost regardless of how this season goes. And that level of dedication to a program and coming back under those situations, is not a given. And yet they bring back a guy who was super helpful on the team last season in a situation where I think there are a lot of folks that wouldn't. So that to
Yeah.
me, that type of thing is a little bit of a game changer.
Yeah, definitely showed a lot of maturity with that because you've got a superstar like Curiel who's going to move over to center field. He, a lot of people are like, "See ya," and he not only is he sticking around, but he's. I saw them against Southeastern Louisiana in Hammond, and he made just some highlight catches in left field on a really windy, difficult day to play ball, and it just. I do expect he's going to have a big year. The other thing I want to point out, Kate Aaron Beatty had a monster fall. Really talented catcher. Coming out of high school 2 years ago, one of these guys that we thought would be immediate impact, and played quite a bit last year, and now this year's his year, and I look for him to have a monster year. The other thing, Zach York at first base. I mean, he's what, 6'2", close to 3 bills. I mean, he's a big dude, and I cannot wait to see how the LSU fan base interacts with him because you know how it is with anyone who looks different in any way is a fascination, right? And he certainly looks that because he's a big boy. Remember Wes Ray at Mississippi State was that big hulking guy and just developed like a cult following, right? And I could see something like that happening with Zach, especially with the way he moves around defensively at first base. I mean, he blew me away. I was expecting more of a big plotting guy, but he wasn't that. So well, that'll be one of the things I watch. And Jake Brown is a player who's had moments, but he hasn't really blown up the way that a lot of us thought he potentially could. And it looks like he's kind of figured things out as well. Junior year, I look for him to hit 3 hole and have a monster year for them. And that's going to be the question because they're while with Milam and Curiel and Stanfield and these guys returning, you have a lot of proven players. But I do think with some of the lost production, it's not just the newcomers who need to fill that gap. It's these returnees who continue to elevate their game and take a bigger piece of that production pie. And I feel like Jake Brown is a big part of that.
Agreed. Circling back to the Zach York piece of it, I
Mhm.
believe the late Jose Lima, formerly of the Astros, Dodgers, pitched for the Tigers, would describe Zach York as being 295 plus tax. I think that's
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
the right way to put it. He reminds me a little bit, not just in terms of body type, but he reminds me of Sonny DeShera in that you don't expect someone with that body type to be as much of a pure hitter as they are.
Yeah.
Like you kind of expect, okay, that guy's going to hit home runs, and they do. I mean, Sonny hit a whole
Mhm.
bunch at Auburn, and sounds like Zach York's ready to hit for power in the SEC. But like the hands are really good, the bat speed is good. There's not, with a bigger guy, you kind of expect you can beat him inside, but these guys, even with those bigger bodies, are able to get to pitches you just don't think they can get to, and are also pretty, with Zach York in particular, you're right. He's a pretty good athlete. Like he
Mhm.
moves, like he's not going to be out there stealing a whole bunch of bases, but in terms of being nimble around the
Yeah.
bag, he is quite good. So the position I want to mention before we get out of here on the position
Mhm.
player side and talk pitching is second base, where I do think they're going to have a little bit of a competition as we lead up to the season. Like
Yeah.
as this is being released, I think, because Mark and I are recording a little bit ahead of time. As you're listening to this, though, I think there will very much be a competition ongoing at second base. Tanner Reeves, a veteran, is in the mix there.
Mm-hmm.
Coming out of fall, he was seen as maybe the favorite there. Just kind of a nice player with a lot of different skills. Kind of not ever going to be like the most dynamic guy out there, but just get the job done. I think Braden Simpson, we talked about him from High Point. He'll be in the second base mix. Seth Dardar from Kansas State will be in the
Yep.
second base mix. Those two guys are going to be more offensive. Braden Simpson, the most offensive of the three.
Yep.
So I wouldn't be shocked if any of those three end up being the regular second baseman, or if none of them are the regular second baseman and they all start 20 games there. Like that
Mm-hmm.
also would not surprise me at all. So keep your eye on second base, because I do feel like that's a position where we don't really know what we're going to see just yet. And it could be a position where they just decide to ride the hot hand. That could also
Yeah.
be the case there. So
Yeah.
something to watch.
Yeah, it's good.
Um,
It's good to have options there because that's one of the things. You have a guy who you really invest in, both literally and figuratively, to come in and fill these roles, and they don't produce. A lot of times, for a lot of programs, that's really a death blow, man. But with LSU, they just have so many other options. They can absorb these kinds of things, and that gives them more margin for error than a lot of programs have.
on the mound, my eyes are drawn to the bullpen here for a couple of reasons. One
Hmm.
is that I think Maverick Rizzi is one of the biggest breakout potential players in the country. I try not to
Hmm.
get overheated about things I see on the Cape, because throughout the summer the talent level on the Cape kind of fluctuates,
Yeah.
much like the waves and the tide at Cape Cod.
Hmm.
Like the talent fluctuates throughout the summer, and so you never know exactly what to make of those. But I don't know. It was like the most dominant. I only saw him for a couple innings, but it was like the most dominant 2 innings I've seen in a long time. Like
Mhm.
the hitters had no shot, especially with wood bats. Like there were some fastballs there where it's probably good they didn't swing, because it would have sent shards of wood all over the infield. So I really liked what I saw there. And then, Zach Cowan is kind of an overlooked
Yeah.
piece of what they did last year. Just a really versatile guy who can start, he can relieve, and when I say relieve, he can get 3 outs or he can throw 3 innings. Like he's
Mhm.
comfortable doing both things. And another example of just um, how it's funny things kind of come together is I saw Jay Johnson speak at ABCA, and he was talking about different roster pieces, and he mentioned Zach Cowan during his speech at ABCA and just said, "Look, here's a guy that we happened to be playing Wofford in a regional the previous year, and that's the only reason I knew him. And had we not played them, I don't know, like I'm
Mhm.
paraphrasing, but had they not played them, like maybe he doesn't end up at LSU because they just don't know who he is.
Right.
We can look at the numbers and look at tape, but we hadn't faced him. And until you face somebody, you don't really know. And so it's just funny how things work out. But those two guys give me a great deal of confidence in the bullpen. Cowan brings the versatility. Rizzi brings the blow it by you kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And I think that's a good security blanket to have when you consider that. And this is how I'll turn it over to you, Mark. Like when you consider that in the rotation, we got really talented pitchers that we like a lot, but the rotation is pretty short on guys who have done it in that specific role within the context of the SEC.
Yeah, no doubt. Kason Evans was one of the breakout stars a year ago. Uh, served as primarily he was the closer, although he did start some games. He's going to move into the Friday role. He looked really good the day I was there. He looked like an SEC ace. It's a short sample size, of course, but just from a makeup standpoint, he's somebody to watch. I do think that Cooper Moore, the Kansas transfer, he was, I guess, arguably Kansas' best pitcher last year. Um, he's coming in and has a chance. Uh, Probably going to be a weekend starter. Had a really strong fall. Also, William Schmidt, who was a big get to school out of high school. Now he's a sophomore. Through some last year, more midweek starts, that kind of thing. Mixed success, but he has matured and he is, uh, I guess, commanding better. I guess is the way I would describe it. The fall and he's got a shot. But for me, well, there's two more guys I want to mention. Uh, Cooper Williams was a guy last year as a freshman who had a small role, but was very effective when he got opportunities, and he's continued that this fall. Sort of like Cowan, I feel like he could pitch in a lot of different roles. He's a lefty. He could end up starting. He could be the midweek guy. He could be a long man. He could be a spot, hey, to come in and get this left-hander out. I think he's gonna be a really key for them. And the other one I'd mentioned is Marcos Paz, freshman. Another heralded recruit coming into Baton Rouge with all kinds of talent. He's coming off Tommy John, so they'll ease him back into it. So I would look for short stints early as he kind of finds himself and builds back up. But certainly by the middle of SEC play, don't be surprised if he's in the rotation because he looks like the next just can't miss LSU ace. And if he develops, I mean, that's certainly a wild card. If he continues that ascension and you have he and Evans along with the other guys that we mentioned, that's a rotation that'll match up with anybody.
Yeah, and another team, we talked about this a little bit with Mississippi State, but another team that isn't necessarily going to have to put those freshmen into
Mhm.
immediate roles where they could kind of sink or swim. Sometimes that's not the worst thing in the world, but whether it's Paz coming back for Tommy John or Reagan
Mhm.
Ricken or Omar
Yeah.
Cerna, whoever it is, like they're in a situation where they can kind of slow play those guys and get them
Yeah.
ready to contribute in June rather than being worried that, hey, we need these guys to contribute in February. They can kind of slow play that. And I think that's huge when you're in a situation where you don't have to force it and you can
Yeah.
just let that all happen organically, which is I think part of the reason why a guy like Casey Evans was so successful last year is that it wasn't necessarily day one he's a dude. It was pretty
Yeah.
close, but his
Right.
role, you could feel it as the season went on. He was just getting his workload in his high leverage spots were just getting a little bit workload getting a little heavier, little heavier, little heavier, a little more tension ratcheting up as the season went on. And by the time it was all said and done, he was as trusted as anybody else. And I think that's maybe a path that will be instructive for some of these other young pitchers and the trajectory they want to take. So
Are you
um,
saying that everyone's gumbo cooks at different
that's
speeds
right.
and
That's right.
yes, they're not all ready at the same time?
Right.
Yeah.
The meat comes out of the smoker at different times, for sure. Whatever food metaphor, we could just do this all day.
I just chose
Um,
gumbos considering the
that's
team
right.
we're talking about.
Considering the team,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. So should be a fun year in Baton Rouge again. Looking forward to seeing this team on the field here in the coming weeks. But that is going to do it for this edition of the Highway to Hoover podcast, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. Our SEC preview podcast preview series, I keep goofing that up, continues on. We have done basically the back half alphabetically of the SEC. Now
Mhm.
we're efforting the front half alphabetically of the SEC. But go back and listen to all the episodes you haven't caught if you have not done so, and stick with us. By the time it's all said and done and we get to opening day, we will have previewed every single team in podcast form, and we'd be honored and humbled if you would join us on that journey. Thank you to Academy Sports and Outdoors for sponsoring this and every episode of Highway to Hoover. Thank you to Mark, as always, for joining me, and thank you, the